All right, let's dive right in today. We're looking at something that's been all over the news in South Korea, the rising cost of lunch, and we've got research articles, news stories, the whole shebang.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how lunch prices have become kind of this unexpected economic, flashpoint.
Yeah, a flashpoint, that's a good word for it. And you know what we're going to do?
What's that?
We're going to unpack not just, what's happening, the rising cost, but we're going to look at why this is happening.
Right, exactly. And the big question, what does it mean for, the average person in South Korea?
Exactly. So let's get to the basics. What are our sources telling us?
Well, one thing is clear. Food prices are climbing.
And not just food prices, but dining out prices, right?
Yeah, that's right. Way faster than wages are increasing.
And we're not talking about, fancy restaurants or anything. This is everyday food.
Right. This is hitting, the everyday staples. Like, for example, kimchi jjigae.
Kimchi jjigae.
Yeah, the kimchi stew. You know that one, right?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Well, that saw a price jump of almost 23% in Seoul.
Wow, 23% in Seoul.
And in Daejeon, over 52%.
Over 50%.
Yeah, in just 4 years. So you might think, okay, well, inflation happens, prices go up.
Right, that's normal.
The thing is, food prices are outpacing overall inflation and wage growth. That's the catch.
Yeah, I see where the problem is then.
Yeah, so imagine your paycheck's pretty much the same, but suddenly your go-to lunch place is way more expensive.
Yeah.
That extra cost has to come from somewhere, right?
Right.
And for a lot of people, that means cutting back on other things or dipping into savings.
Yeah, and it's not just about, tightening your belt or whatever. Our sources are saying it's actually impacting people's quality of life.
That's right.
That, that quick, affordable lunch is becoming kind of a luxury.
Yeah, it's not as easy as it used to be.
Even gimbap. Gimbap is the ultimate budget-friendly meal, right?
It's a classic.
And even that has seen prices jump over 30% in Seoul.
It really is. It's not just about one dish or one ingredient. It's a systemic issue. And what's interesting here, it's not just that lunch prices are rising.
Okay.
It's that they're rising faster than regular inflation. So there's an index specifically for food eaten out,
okay,
which includes, everything, bibimbap, your after-work drinks, whatever.
Right.
And that index has climbed much more steeply than the overall inflation rate.
So something specific is happening with food service itself, that's driving these costs up.
Yeah.
What could be behind that?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? There's a few factors. Think about restaurants in busy areas.
Okay.
They're dealing with rising rents. The cost of ingredients is all over the place, especially with those global supply chain issues everyone's talking about.
Right.
And even finding staff is more expensive. All those things, they all add up and, they trickle down to that price you see on the menu.
So it's like a perfect storm hitting your kimchi jjigae. But okay, so prices are up. How are people actually dealing with this? People got to eat.
Yeah, right. Well, it looks like people are getting pretty resourceful.
Yeah.
We're seeing this huge increase in people going for those convenience store meals or, eating at their company cafeterias if they have one.
That's interesting. And we have some numbers on that, right, from our sources?
Yeah, the numbers are pretty wild. One convenience store chain, GS25, reported that in 2024, their lunchbox sales were more than 3 times higher than in previous years.
3 times higher. Wow.
Yeah. And another chain, CU, those triangle rice balls, the samgak gimbap, sales more than doubled.
That's a lot of convenience store food.
It is. But this shift to, all these convenience store meals, it raises some questions too.
Yeah, like what?
Like, are people getting the same quality of food? And is this really a long-term solution? It's kind of like a big social experiment happening.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And it gets even more interesting when we start looking at how this is affecting people differently, right? Across income levels. Our sources mention that this is hitting low-wage workers especially hard.
Absolutely. Think about it. The average monthly wage has gone up a bit, sure.
Okay.
But it's barely keeping up with regular inflation, let alone these skyrocketing food prices.
And the minimum wage increase, that hasn't even matched the average wage increase, right?
Exactly. So the people who are earning the least are getting hit the hardest. Their buying power is shrinking, and even basic necessities are becoming more and more difficult to afford. This goes beyond just budgeting, It's about economic fairness.
Yeah, I see that.
And social stability. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's kind of a wake-up call, isn't it? When even the people doing essential jobs are struggling to afford a basic lunch, there's a bigger issue going on.
Right. It really makes you think. And our sources had this one example, this story that really resonated with people. I think it kind of highlights what we're talking about here.
Okay, what's that?
So, university cleaning workers in Seoul.
Okay.
They actually demanded a higher meal allowance.
Interesting.
And it became this big story because it showed how this lunch crunch was affecting real people.
Real people with real jobs, right? Essential jobs.
Exactly. These are the folks who keep those universities running, right? And they were basically saying, hey, our current allowance, it's not even enough for a single roll of gimbap. So it made people stop and think, about what a living wage really means.
Yeah, it puts things into perspective, doesn't it?
It does. Because these workers weren't asking for fancy meals, just enough to cover a decent lunch during their workday.
Yeah.
And the fact that so many people connected with their story, it shows how this issue has become.
It's become this sensitive topic that resonates with a lot of people.
Exactly.
And what happened to those workers? Did they get their higher meal allowance?
They did. They actually negotiated a better deal.
That's great. So it shows that, speaking up and advocating for your needs can actually make a difference.
It definitely does. It's a good reminder that, individual voices can have power. And it also kind of highlights the role of, things like labor unions in addressing these kinds of economic pressures.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem. What about solutions? Is there anything promising being talked about?
Well, there are some potential policy changes being degoted.
Okay, give me the rundown.
Well, one that's gaining some traction is increasing the tax-exempt meal allowance.
The tax-exempt meal allowance.
Okay, so the idea is that workers could have a bigger chunk of their income to spend on lunch without being taxed on it. So, theoretically, that could put more money in their pockets for food.
Okay, that seems like it could make a difference.
It could, but some experts are, they're a little bit cautious about whether it would be a fix-all solution.
What do they mean?
Well, the concern is that it might mainly benefit larger companies, ones that can already afford to offer those benefits.
Right, I see.
So smaller businesses or people in lower-paying jobs might not see as much of an impact.
So it could actually make things, more unequal.
Yeah, that's the worry, that it might widen the gap between those who are already doing okay and those who are struggling.
Okay, so what other ideas are there?
Well, another one that comes up a lot is raising the minimum wage.
The minimum wage, okay.
So the logic there is that if you lift the floor for everyone, it gives those at the bottom more buying power.
Right, so they can afford those basic things like lunch.
Exactly. Of course, raising the minimum wage is a pretty complex issue.
Yeah, I bet.
There's a lot of back and forth about how it could affect businesses, jobs, and the whole economy.
Right.
But it's a really important part of the conversation when we're talking about whether people can afford to eat.
Especially those earning the least, right?
Exactly.
So sounds like South Korea has some tough choices to make.
They do. There's no easy answer here. It's about weighing those different options and finding the one that helps the most people.
Yeah, finding the best way forward. Wow, it's amazing, isn't it? How something as simple as lunch can lead to all these bigger conversations, like about the economy, about fairness.
It really is.
About people's choices. So as we're wrapping up our deep dive here into South Korea's lunch crunch, what are the big things we should remember? Like, what should our listener be thinking about after they finish listening?
Well, I think one thing that really stands out is that, the price of lunch, in this case, can tell us a lot about what's happening in a society.
Okay.
It's like a window into bigger trends. We see that gap growing between what people earn and how much it costs to live, especially in those big cities.
Right.
We see how people are adapting, getting creative.
Like those convenience store meals.
Exactly. Or, coming together to fight for better working conditions.
Yeah, it shows how we're all connected too, right? Even through something as basic as food. Remember how we talked about global supply chains and the price of ingredients going up?
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Makes you think about how everything's kind of linked together, all around the world.
Absolutely. This isn't just something happening in South Korea. Food prices are going up everywhere. Lots of countries are dealing with the same kinds of problems. Like, can people afford to eat? And how do we make sure everyone has access to food?
Yeah, it's a big question.
And those solutions South Korea is talking about, like those tax breaks for meals or raising the minimum wage, those conversations are happening everywhere, just in different ways.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And what about that trend with the convenience store meals? We talked about that earlier. Is that really going to work out in the long run? What do you think?
It's interesting, right? People are definitely adapting.
Yeah.
But I do wonder about some things. Those prepackaged meals, they're easy, they're usually cheap.
Right.
But are they really that nutritious? And are people getting enough variety in their diets? It makes you think about how we make sure everyone has healthy choices.
Yeah, affordable and healthy choices.
Exactly. It's not just about having enough money for lunch. It's about being able to choose food that's good for you.
Right. And food is more than just fuel, right? It's part of our culture. It's how we connect with people.
It's a big part of how we live.
Exact. And that's what makes this whole lunch crunch thing so interesting. It's not just about, the money part of it.
It goes deeper than that.
It really does. It makes you think about how we get our food, what it means to us.
And what it says about the world we live in.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to finish on. So next time you're grabbing lunch, wherever you are, take a minute to think about, what went into getting that food on your plate. And maybe, who knows, it'll start a conversation, or give you some new ideas.
I like that. And maybe even inspire you to do something.
Yeah, to make things better for everyone.
To make sure everyone can enjoy a good, affordable meal.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And to our listeners out there, we hope you enjoyed exploring this with us. And until next time, keep learning, keep asking those questions, and keep diving deep.